Cynics Akita, the eagle has landed. Scholars today debate the consequences and the legacy of European colonialism in Africa amongst themselves. Well, we say colonialism was extremely detrimental to the African continent, resulting in the assimilation of African peoples, mass drain of raw materials, dividing the continent with no respect to history and culture, leading ultimately to the current day neocolonialism.
The scramble for Africa. Colonization was motivated by the European hunger for African resources.
Europeans drained the continent while also upheaving traditional African culture and spiritual practices, enforcing their rule
in the most violent was employed to impose Leopold's dominion. The right hands of those who failed to meet rubber quotas were severed. Even young children were not spared. In 1896, a German newspaper reported that 1,308 hands had been gathered in one day.
One of the results of this constant abuse was
the destruction of belief in Africa, the lack of self-confidence, the feeling that we can't do it. And I think that was also a result of the colonial impact, because I think it was short enough to destroy leadership in Africa. It was short, but not long enough to replace it with anything else. So the old ways, the old political systems were just wiped out by the colonial impact. And with that, any form of political or cultural leadership was obliterated.
West African regions. It was also the British Empire that in 1894 imposed an arbitrary boundary around the many diverse ethnic groups and kingdoms that would make up Uganda. The southern Bantu-speaking people were given economic, political, and educational advantage. The northern ethnic groups, two in particular, the Acholi and the Langi, were the main recruits for military and police positions. By exploiting linguistic, ethnic, and cultural differences between the peoples of the North and South, Britain's divide and rule policies created a tension between them that helped maintain British rule. In Rwanda, Belgium entrenched the idea of the Hutu as a workforce and the Tutsi as extenders of Belgian rule. The politicization of these two cultures would profoundly contribute to the genocide of 1994. In Sudan, the British ruled the Arabs in the north and the blacks in the south as separate colonies, only to combine the areas before independence in 1956. The result has been relentless civil war, the Darfur massacres being the latest tragedy.
So far we've discussed past events which have caused consequences in the future. Let us look at current systems, such as neocolonialism, in which external forces/countries utilize mostly indirect methods to influence other countries/states, in particular former colonies. One example is something known as France Afrique, where France uses its extensive consular network in Africa in tandem with French businesses and foreign aid to force former colonies to obey, lest they be put into even more debt, or they use more direct methods, where the French military has intervened on the continent in 30 different excursions since.
Ultimately, we can clearly see that colonialism ravaged the African continent in the 19th/20th century, destroying their culture/practices and replacing it with European, such as Christianity, and mandating European languages. Also dividing and setting different groups against each other, but then creating artificial countries that divided homogeneous groups across different countries and grouped non-homogeneous groups within the same state, laying the groundwork for the decades of civil war within many of the African nations. Now, we would love to talk about this in the past tense, but even though the colonies were liberated, they're still very closely connected with the previous oppressor, which, for example, France uses an extensive network of politicians, businessmen, military aid, etc., to influence the previous colonies. Europe left a deep scar on Africa, stunting growth and progress. We can hope that in the generations to come, healing and restoration can occur.